Hi, welcome back to the second and final part of lecture 3. What I want to do in this lecture is finish off talking about writing your report, so critical writing as part of the module, and hopefully get you in a good position for when you actually start writing your reports next term. So what I'm going to do today is talk about what I've called here editing levels. So think about the different levels in your report and actually how you might edit those, how you might go through those to improve them and make them perfect before you submit your report. So we'll look at different levels that I think are really useful ways of thinking when it comes to actually editing some reports. We'll look at academic integrity. I mean, by that I mainly mean referencing. So if we are referencing something from another paper, to make sure we do it properly within our reports, to make it very clear that it's not our work, but it's actually something we've taken from another paper. Continue talking a bit, we've talked about narrative already, but I want to talk a little bit more about narrative and guiding the reader to make it easy for them. And then rather boring things, but things that actually make reports much better, to do with readability and spelling and making sure you've got the grammar right. And I want to talk a little bit about avoiding simple errors, things actually, to be fair, that happen all the time. Things like headings and subheadings and what should happen, what their relationship be, and then a final check on your report before you end up submitting it. And remember, although we're talking about specifically the report for this module, everything that we talk about is actually relevant in the future when you're writing reports or writing papers, for if you work in industry or work in academia. So editing levels. So sorry, it's quite a busy slide, but to get over the different things, if you follow this, it will make your life easier. So editing is all about turning a first draft or a second or even a third draft finally into a finished product, which is well polished and you're happy to submit. So what I've done here is I divided this type of editing up into 4 levels, which I think if you follow this for this report and every other report that you do, it'll actually make your life much easier. So what the editing here is to do is to try and pick up particular types of errors through multiple passes. So what I would suggest is you don't assume that you just do one edit. That generally isn't going to pick up everything that you need. So by doing these multiple edits, I think you'll find it more efficient and you will pick up lots of different errors as you go through that. So the first one is structural level editing. I would hope that actually this should be relatively straightforward, in that most of that has been done through interactions with your supervisor for the report. So over the next few weeks, as you're producing the report, you'll be talking to your supervisor about what you're going to write about and how you want to structure it. And through those interactions, hopefully the structural editing should be done. But basically, when you're doing that, when you're talking about that, when you're looking at your first draft, are the sections that you think actually don't need to be there? You could combine those 2 sections into one. They don't really need to be 2 sections. Or actually, I probably need to add in an extra section to talk about a particular aspect of the research that I've been doing. As I said, I would recommend that you do that with your supervisor as you're doing that. And I would recommend you do it quite early on, because the problem is that if you spend a long time actually polishing your text, polishing the structure and polishing the detail of each section, you're going to be much less likely to actually cut sections because you spent a lot of time on it. So even though it may not be ideal, you'll think, actually, I've spent a lot of time on this, I don't want to really delete it. So try and get the structure right reasonably early on. As I said, do that with your supervisor. Academic integrity, so editing for that, I mean, it's really important. It makes sure that you're not accidentally plagiarizing material. So one way you can avoid that is by not cut and pasting large sections of text from somebody else's work into your work. I mean, it happens sometimes where there's small sections, but most of the time you should try and avoid doing that. And of course, there can be serious consequences if you actually do plagiarize other material. The software that we use will likely pick that up and then there could be academic issues if you do that. So make sure the academic integrity is done properly, and we'll talk about that in a few slides' time. And then guide the reader, make sure the narrative is correct. So start off broad. We talked about this a couple of lectures ago. So start broad and then guide the reader through the text as you get more detailed, and there are no surprises for the reader as they go through that. And make sure there's good linkage in the text. So and we'll look at this in a slide or two, but make sure, you know, and you've got internal referencing, so you can reference another section in your text, so you can say see this section for more. And then finally, readability. Make sure that it's easy for the reader when they're reading your reports. If the reader struggles, if finding it difficult, if the flow isn't right, if they're jumping all over the place, they quite likely form a rather negative impression of your work. Even though the work may be good, the actual reading is not so good. And at the bottom of the page here, you'll see there's a reference, a web link to a resource that you can have a look at for editing levels. Okay, so let's go through each of those levels in a little bit more detail. So structural level editing. So this is a high level questions that you should be asking yourself during this editing phase. So the first part of the editing phase. So is the outcome of the report well matched to the original topic or title? So have you actually done what you say you're going to do? Do the sections of the report actually convey to the reader what you intended them to convey? Or do they get rather unfocused and you go off in tangents? You go off in blind alleys, as it were, to do that. So make sure that it flows nicely and it's conveying what you want it to convey, rather than lots of other things which are peripheral to your main message. Okay, does the structure have everything that you need it to present your arguments across? You want to make sure that the arguments come across clearly, and all the things that you could cut. So is that completely peripheral to your argument, or is it actually adds in so that the argument in the end makes sense? And does the information you present appear in appropriate sections? So don't kind of have a section which is talking about wheeled robots, and you have another section talking about legged robots, but within the section on legged robots, you introduce more material about wheeled robots, where clearly that should have been in a previous section. So just think carefully about where the different arguments are going, where the different text is going, and if it's in the right section. So all that can be done fairly early on, I would suggest, to make sure you get the structure right. Okay, academic integrity. So your statement should be backed up with appropriate references. And remember, last time we talked about unreferenced sentences and that they weren't good. It was not good. It's not good practice. You should never really do that. So make sure statements that you make about different aspects of your report have appropriate references. And if you are quoting from another paper or from a book, from another source, make sure that's really, really, really clear. So if it's just a short quote, then what you should do is put them, they should appear in quotation marks, as I've done on this line here, and then add the reference at the end of that. So it's very clear. And either the reference could be numeric, or it could be, as we saw earlier on, it could say Smith 2015. However it is you're going to do your reference. Okay, so that's really clear now that this isn't your text. This is text that's been taken from, in this case, reference number 6. If you've got a longer quote, so let's say it's a paragraph which is maybe 7 or 8 lines, then the best practice really should be that you indent left and right, so you bring the text in, so it appears very clearly on your text. You should put quotes again, quotation marks, as we've done here, and also it's probably good practice then to put that text in italics, so it really stands out. So it's really standing out. So the right and left margins have come in. It's in quotes and it's in italics. So that's, and of course it has a reference after it as well. I mean, I would suggest that something you wouldn't normally do. I would discourage it unless it's really, really important. But if it is, then make sure you make it stand out like that. Let's talk briefly about figures and tables. So you're quite likely in your report to have a number of figures and a number of tables, and you may have taken those from other publications that you've read. That's fine, but just make sure that in the caption, so in the text directly underneath the figure or the table, you make sure you cite it in that particular place. It's really clear that this particular picture of a legged robot, it's not your picture or diagram, it's actually taken from another paper. So reproducing, so kind of copy and paste from a PDF file, for example, into your work is okay. But in the caption, you should make sure you do something like reproduced from paper number 6. And if it's a really long source that you've taken it from, so maybe a really large book, then it's quite useful then to actually be a bit more specific. So the example I've given here is figure 5.3.1 reproduced from 6. You could also put page 119 reproduced from 6 or something like that, just so if the reader wants to go back and look at that, they can see that. And also you're making it very clear once again that this isn't your figure. There may be other occasions where you actually take a figure or a table from another source, but then you adapt it in some way. So maybe you have a figure and you want to add an arrow onto it and actually make some note about that. So what you can do there, the best practice there is in the caption again, you put adapted from reference 6. And then finally, what you might find is that you've got a figure from another source, but actually the quality is not very good. So what you decide to do is you actually reproduce it yourself. So you use a drawing package to reproduce that figure. So you're not making any changes to it. All you're doing is make it clearer. So again, normally good practice for that is you might write after 6. So that what that's basically saying is you've taken it from this paper, or this figure has been redrawn based on figure 5.3.1 from 6. Okay, this is because the drawing is yours, but the intellectual content of the figure is not. So again, just make it very, very clear where it's come from. Okay, editing to guide the reader. So the kind of the narrative, the reading through, making it all nice and clear. Okay, so I would suggest, and we've talked about this before, if you remember, on a number of occasions, standard 3 stages that can be used at all levels. So it could be used for the entire report, down to section level, or even possibly down to paragraph level. Depends how big the paragraph is, really. And you can tell the reader what you're about to tell them and why. So relatively short, maybe just a sentence. Actually present them with the information. So this is the larger part of the text, whether it's the report or section or paragraph. So this is the part that people normally do. And then tell the reader what you've told them. So a short summary, again, 1 or 2 sentences. And if you do that all the time, then actually you'll find that it becomes very clear to the reader and there's no surprises. So, and then finally, if you think about the whole report, kind of top and tailing the report, have you explicitly told the reader the aim of the report in the introduction? And have you explicitly stated if, in your opinion, the content of the report meets this aim? And you would do that in the conclusions at the end of the report. So top and tailing the report. So again, it's clear to the reader. And then finally, a question to ask is, does the main report, body of the report, signpost the reader? So internal references backwards and forwards. So this section will be, this concept will be explained more in section 2.3, or as noted in section 1.7. So backwards and forwards so the reader know what's going on. And a good idea to summarize subsections after a lengthy or complex section, telling the reader what they now understand. So again, this top and tailing thing is really good practice. So do that all the time and you won't go far wrong. Editing for readability. So this is kind of coming towards the end now. We've got the structure right, we've got the narrative right, we've got all the appropriate reference in the text right. So now spelling and grammar. So spell checkers are really good these days. So they should eliminate most spelling errors, but of course they won't eliminate the wrong word in there. Okay, so grammatical mistakes, there is some grammatical checks within these packages these days, but then they're not going to pick up everything. So you still have to do the hard work. So you still have to do the proofreading, and it's vital to do that to make sure it's right. So as it says there, a grammatical sentence is not necessarily a meaningful sentence, or at least it may not mean what you intend it to mean. Again, you might put the wrong word in there, which changes the whole meaning, even though grammatically it might still be right. So some sentences may be nonsense, they may be poorly phrased, or contain incorrect words. As I said, the grammar checker may not pick those up. It may be unclear or poorly phrased. It may be too long. So one of the things a common mistake is that people make sentences too long. So just think about a sentence and, you know, is it too long? Can I stop it? Can I stop it halfway through and then make it 2 sentences? So just think about that when you're doing that. So a mistake, you may be surprised, but happens quite often, a mistake people do. So when they're writing the text to start with, they put in sections where they put to do. So that means that they haven't done it yet. They haven't maybe read the text, or they haven't thought about what they're going to write. So they just put a to do reminder for themselves. And then when they submit it, they've forgotten to take these out. So you get these little sections which says to do in them, which clearly you want to get rid of. And there may be parts of text which are left over from editing. So you've kept them in there for some reason to remind yourself, and then you forget to take them out at the end. So kind of simple mistakes, which are just annoying, certainly to you and potentially to the reader, silly mistakes at the end. So you know, this is what the final proofreading is all about. And so one thing I would recommend that you do between you is kind of buddy up with somebody. And when your report is almost at the end, you could send it to them, they could send their report to you, and just to look up for these final proofreading things to highlight for you that you've made silly mistakes. So that's up to you whether you want to do that. Okay, avoiding simple errors in the text. Okay, so this is one that's actually really quite common, and it's one that's really easy to fix. So headings shouldn't touch. So what I mean by this is an example here. So we've got section 2, literature review, subsection 2.1, topic 1 of the literature review, and then subsection 2.1.1, an aspect of topic 1, and then the text begins. Okay, why we've got all these headings that are touching with no text between them. So the way you should do it is shown towards the bottom of this slide. So section 2, literature review, and then include at least one paragraph explaining the organization and the aim of this section of section 2. So we have some text in there. Then section 2.1, topic 1 of the literature review, at least one paragraph again explaining how this subsection fits into the main section, possibly starting what is intended to be achieved, e.g. the necessary background to understand the next subsection, to understand section 2.2. And here, as you see, this is an example of forward referencing within your report. So we're talking about a section that's coming up. And then finally, subsection 2.1.1, an aspect of topic 1. Okay, so this a paragraph explaining how this subsection fits into the subsection 2.1. And this could be similar to text to above, but of course the reader now experiences this differently because they've already got a mindset of what's coming on. And then the reader understands how this relates to the report as a whole and what they should be achieving by reading it. So don't have section headings touching. Have some text in between that's guiding the reader through why they're reading this, what's about to come up. Makes it much clearer for them. Okay, so a final checklist for the presentation of the report. Do all the figures and tables have captions? So we talked about that before. Make sure the caption is descriptive. Make sure it makes it easy for the reader to understand what they're looking at when they're looking at a figure or a table. And do the graphs and tables have axes labeled and headings correct? So just simple things, but they can be really annoying if you miss those out. Are all figures and tables and appendices, if you have appendices, referenced in the text? So don't have a figure where it isn't referenced in the text. So somewhere in the text, you'd expect it to say, as illustrated in figure 4, something like that, however it is. So always make sure you reference figures and tables and appendices in the text. Okay, are the sections numbered sequentially? Most software packages that you write in will actually do this automatically, but maybe you've turned that off. And if you have turned that off and you're doing it yourself, make sure you get that right. Don't have too many blank lines at the start and end of sections. So sometimes you see text and then really quite a large blank section before the next text. It's not needed. You should be able to structure. If you use the templates correctly from the IEEE that we've told you to use, then that should actually disappear as well. Make sure you're within the word limit that we've specified for you. Make sure you've removed all the reminders for yourself. So things like to-do instructions. Okay, make sure you separate headings with text, as we've just talked about. And also make sure you proofread the references at the end of the section, at the end of your report, to make sure that they're properly formatted and they've got all the proper. So the point within a reference section is that the reader should be able to go and find that paper. So you need to have quite detailed information. If it's in a journal, what the journal is, the year of the journal, the volume number of the journal, and the number of the journal, and hopefully the pages within that journal, and maybe a web link, maybe a DOI link to the paper. So make sure it's fully formatted and you've got all the information you need to go to it if you need to. So finally, for lecture 3, and this is the last main lecture of the module. Okay, so some tasks which we can talk about in the following workshops. Okay, so analyze the first paragraph of 2 or 3 papers in your reading list. And having read that first paragraph, okay, does it take what's the purpose of that paragraph and how have they achieved that purpose? So just think what they're trying to get over with that paragraph, and do you think as a new reader to that whether they've achieved that? And then draft the first paragraph of the introduction section of your report. What are you setting out to achieve? Consider if you've achieved that. So this is quite difficult because you've got in your head what you want to achieve, and then when you read it, because you know what you want to achieve, it's quite easy to assume that you have achieved it. So try and step away from your report, reread it, and seeing whether you achieve that. Okay, and practice dissecting texts that you're reading to see how other authors are constructing their arguments, because if you do that, that will help you when it comes to writing your text. And then finally, not for the workshop, of course, but for next term, research, read, and write your report. So the assessment for this module. Okay, so as I said, that's the end of lecture 3. And we'll talk about some of those details in the upcoming workshops. Okay, thank you very much.